Welcome to the Institute of All Intelligent Life. My name is Alan Kiesler, and today we are continuing our course on extraterrestrial spirituality. What we are going to discuss today is the Sumerian civilization and its relationship to our topic of extraterrestrial spirituality. So I mentioned on the class yesterday how ancient Sumerian texts describe the creation of humanity by Enki and his sister Ninmah. Very briefly, I'll recount that the extraterrestrial civilization on the planet Nibiru was suffering because its atmosphere was somehow getting depleted or was losing its heat or something. I don't know exactly all the details, but they needed gold in order to prevent the deterioration of that atmosphere, and they eventually found gold on the earth and were able to first extract gold from the oceans and then from gold mines. And that gold was made into a monatomic form, which was then dispersed in their atmosphere, which saved their planet and by upgrading the atmosphere to a condition in which their planet could survive. So the important point that we're coming to is that during the mining of the gold, the workers from Nibiru who were doing the mining became tired of all that hard work and rebelled, and eventually the decision was made that a ape man, which we call Homo erectus, an early pre-human type of primate, would be genetically engineered, and a hybrid would be created which would be a hybrid between the Anunnaki DNA and the Homo erectus DNA, and that was Homo sapiens. And this occurred about 200,000 years ago, according to the Sumerian historical texts, which of course most Western scholars considered it just mythology, mainly because these Anunnaki, as the residents of Nibiru were called, were so fantastic. They had powers that were unbelievable, such as genetic engineering, and they had spaceships, so they were considered gods in some mythology. But Zecharia Sitchin had reinterpreted or translated the texts as historical documents rather than as mythology, and that produced a new type of interpretation, a new understanding, which was very, very interesting to me and to many, many people, especially because it correlated in an interesting way with the biblical account of the creation of man, in which the most key factor was that Enki, with his sister Ninmah, who created the Adapu, the first human being, was somehow associated with a serpent. And Enlil, his brother, who was younger than him in age but senior to him because his mother was the chief queen of their father, Anu, Enlil was the creator in the biblical story, and the serpent was his enemy in the biblical story. But in the Sumerian story, the creator was Enki, the serpent, somehow associated with the serpent, although he wasn't a serpent, and his opposite party, his half-brother, was Enlil, who was not the creator. So somehow it seems that the biblical story is very similar, and as we're going to discuss a little bit more, obviously based upon the Sumerian story. So that's the background of what we discussed yesterday. and it raises a lot of questions, naturally, about the biblical story and about the idea of the creation of man in not only the Bible, but other religious traditions also. There are very similar accounts. So we need to study Sumeria more, and that's what we're going to do today. The most important factor about Sumeria is that it was the oldest civilization, according to modern Western anthropology, and it started about 4000 BC. And what's most astonishing about it is that it appeared very suddenly, and not only that, it appeared at a very high state of development. And it just like overnight appeared in terms of historical time periods. It was astonishing in terms of archaeology. It was astonishing how this highly developed civilization suddenly appeared in Sumeria, which is southern Iraq. And then gradually it spread to northern Iraq, Babylonia, to Palestine, to Egypt, and to Greece, and Rome, and Europe. And what was going on here? Because the civilization gradually deteriorated. In other words, it didn't, as our modern Western anthropology and Darwinian theory suggests, it's not that civilization gradually evolved upward, but it was suddenly introduced at a very high level of civilization, and it gradually deteriorated. It devolved. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Sumerian civilization and a little bit about how it was discovered. First of all, the European scholars who began studying archaeology in the Middle East were biblical scholars. They were interested in discovering the places that were mentioned in the Bible in terms of archaeology. In other words, were those places real? And if so, where exactly were they, and how were they described in the texts of those that they were discovering? They were discovering texts in languages that they didn't understand, but gradually they were able to, with the famous Rosetta Stone discovery, which was 3 languages, all giving the same message. So they were able to decipher on that basis the Egyptian hieroglyphs, and then the other ancient Mesopotamian languages. And on this basis, they gradually realized that Western civilization did not come from Greece, as they had thought, but before Greece and Egypt, the Greeks referred to Egypt as a predecessor civilization, but then it became apparent that before Egypt there was a civilization in the Babylonian, that is in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, and as they deciphered those languages, Babylonian languages, then they found Akkadian, which was the common language of Assyria and Babylon, and then they discovered that those texts were speaking about a still earlier language, and in fact some of the texts that they found, these were all clay tablets, they had long lists of words which they couldn't understand, and then they realized this was like a dictionary for Sumerian. And with the help of those texts that were really like dictionaries, they were able to decipher the Sumerian language. And then this all became very, very clear that the biblical accounts had come from the Babylonian accounts, and the Babylonian accounts had come from the Sumerian accounts. So this was quite astonishing. It was astonishing to me when I first heard about it. And I'm just going to go into a little bit of detail now about the Sumerian civilization, how it came about. I've just described briefly how it was discovered gradually as the archaeologists and the linguists pushed back in time. They found that the earlier civilization, the Sumerian civilization, was actually more advanced than the later civilizations. So I'm not going to go into details about the language, but I'm just going to show you a couple of charts here from Zecharia Sitchin's book, The 12th Planet, and why it's called the 12th Planet, and we will be talking about extraterrestrials more in later classes, but today we're going to be talking about the Sumerians, who actually were in association with extraterrestrials. They were actually, their civilization was clearly generated by extraterrestrials. They were taught civilization by extraterrestrials, and these beings, the Anunnaki, had come from a planet called Nibiru, and according to the Sumerian texts themselves, they were extraordinary beings. In fact, as I had mentioned earlier, they were considered gods by the translators of the Sumerian texts, the early European translators of the Sumerian texts, because they were similar to the Greek gods and the Egyptian gods and the Babylonian gods, and so all these accounts were considered mythology. But Zecharia Sitchin made the key observation that these texts can be viewed as historical documents rather than as mythology. And the only thing that needs to be done is to realize that these gods were not actually gods. They were actually extraterrestrials who had powers that, at the time these texts were first discovered and translated, seemed totally impossible for any human being to have, or any ordinary being to have. They had spaceships that they could travel to heaven in, and they had weapons that were unthinkable to us until the discovery of atomic bombs and laser weapons. And they did things like creating human beings, which would also seem to be impossible, but now with genetic engineering, we understand that things like that can actually be done. And actually the Sumerian texts describe, as we mentioned last class, and I just reviewed briefly today, the most important feature was the creation of human beings, according to the Sumerian texts, by Enki and his sister Ninmah as genetic engineers. They mixed the DNA of a hominid, Homo erectus, as the scientists today call him, an advanced primate, not advanced in terms of Homo sapiens, but advanced in terms of gorillas and chimpanzees, and that Homo erectus was then hybridized. Its DNA was mixed somehow with the Anunnaki DNA, and the result was Homo sapiens. And originally, the Homo sapiens, according to the Sumerian texts, were workers. They were created specifically to do the work of mining in the gold mines of South Africa. All right, so now let's find out a little bit more about the Sumerian civilization, which, as I said, was started about 4000 BC, plus or minus some centuries, and it was very, very advanced. And the Sumerians had the first of practically everything that we consider civilization. They had the first written language. Maybe they had the first schools. They had the first court systems. They had the law systems. For many years, Hammurabi, the Babylonian king and lawgiver, was considered the first lawgiver. But then it was discovered that there were Sumerian lawgivers who had similar systems of law, which were the basis of Hammurabi's code of laws. So the Sumerians had the first of so many things. The first advanced agriculture, the first cities, the first printing. Actually, they had not only the first written language, but they had a system of movable type, where they had seals which they could reproduce. So it was a sort of rotary printing, and we could just go on and on. I'm just going to read to you some of the Sumerian firsts, which the great scholar Kramer had listed, as he was one of the leading scholars of the Sumerian civilization. And I mean, they had, of course, in Iraq there is the substantial amount of petroleum, so they used petroleum products as fuels. And that was another first. They used petroleum products for building roads, just like we do now. And they used petroleum products in medicines. They had the first development of many fruits that came from Sumeria to the rest of the Middle East and Europe. And they had the first artificial network of canals for transportation. So this is a list that Samuel Kramer in 1956 said, in which he describes in each one of 25 chapters one of the firsts in the Sumerian civilization. The first schools, the first bicameral Congress. They had a government system in which there were two houses. The first historian, the first pharmacopoeia, they had a total medical system in which they had lists of drugs. They even had surgery. The first farmer's almanac, the first cosmogony and cosmology, the first Job, that is the story of Job in the Bible, was very similar to and probably based upon a Sumerian figure, very much like Job. The first proverbs and sayings, the first literary debates, the first Noah. As I mentioned yesterday also, there were stories of a flood and a great personality who had a ark or a huge boat on which he saved the species when everyone else was drowned. And the first library catalog, man's first heroic age, his first law codes, his first social reforms, which meant that there were laws established based on truth and justice, love and compassion, and after some time deterioration came in, and somebody came along as a reformer and appealed to the ancient texts, the ancient systems of justice, to reestablish a civilization or a society based on justice and truth. And the first medicine, the first agriculture, the first search for world peace and harmony. So we can just go on and on, but there are, they had music which was based upon the same scale that we use today in the world, both Western music as well as Oriental music. In South Asia, for example, there's the same sort of scale we call do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. It has, I don't remember right now, the South Asian syllables that are used for the same scale. So the Sumerians introduced that also. Sumerians had huge temples with thousands of scribes. They had teachers and schools, and we can still read the essays that the students wrote in their schools because they were recorded on tablets. And not only did they have language and writing, but they had the sciences of the day: botany, zoology, geography, mathematics, and theology. Literary works were studied, and new ones were written. So this is just incredible to think that the oldest civilization known to modern Western archaeology was highly advanced. So that list, I see somebody has asked the book name and writer name, please. This list that I just gave was written by Professor Samuel N. Kramer, and the name of the book is From the Tablets of Sumer. So I will mention that in the post. I can add that. And the book in which all this information is given is Zecharia Sitchin's book, The 12th Planet. Here, I have it here so I can show it to you. Let me just turn my camera around. This is The 12th Planet by Zecharia Sitchin. So this information that I'm giving you comes from this book. Okay, now the main point I'm wanting to make today, which I hope I've made sufficiently already, is that the oldest civilization, the Sumerian civilization, was also perhaps the most advanced, but highly advanced, and not until the 20th century were many things discovered that were definitely known and used by the Sumerians. And their texts describe, as I just mentioned, things that are like laser weapons, genetic engineering. So I'm going to conclude this section by just talking about the extraterrestrial spirituality, or the Sumerian theology, you might say, because they had gods. This is the point I'm making. The Sumerian civilization was based upon, for example, their laws were based upon divine, as they were interpreted, orders from the gods. And what's interesting is that each Sumerian city had its own god. And there was a hierarchy of gods also. So we will not go into those details today, but I will in the future. But the point I'm making is that it was a system of religion. They had a system of religion. They had huge temples. Maybe I can show you a couple of pictures from Zecharia Sitchin's books. They had huge temples, which were pyramids built often on the top of pyramids. And these pyramids were like the center of a city. They were like mountains, you can say. So here's one picture. It's not a very good picture, but I'll show it to you. There you can see this is a city, a Sumerian city, with that pyramid, a stepped pyramid, called a ziggurat. So, and then they often had the temple of the god on top of that. And that pyramid was of course higher than everything else, and it was the place where the priests would literally meet the so-called gods, and they would get instruction from them, and they would also do offerings to them. So this is about all I'm going to say right now. I'll just show you one more picture here. This is another story, and you can see it. This is a picture of a divinity here. So the Sumerians had a highly developed religious, and they had a highly developed civilization. So where did it come from? As I've indicated already, it came from extraterrestrial sources. Otherwise, the modern archaeologists are astonished. They just cannot believe how this civilization could so suddenly have developed. They have no explanation for it. And the explanation that's only reasonable one, but most people in the modern academy don't consider it reasonable, so they won't even consider it. But it's the only reasonable explanation of the Sumerian civilization is that it came from somewhere else where there already was an advanced civilization, because there was no advanced civilization at that time on the earth that at least we know about in modern Western academic circles. So that source can be learned from the Sumerian texts themselves. In other words, if we accept their texts as historical rather than as mythology, then we can learn a whole, I would call it a timeline. It's the Sumerian timeline, because there are also other timelines of history which don't completely agree with the Sumerian one. But this Sumerian timeline, which I will just talk a little bit about, is clearly established in one sense by the existence of the Sumerian civilization. The Nibiruans, so the Anunnaki, the people who came from the planet of Nibiru, which I mentioned last class, is a planet that has a very, very long orbit around our sun, or it may be the planet of another star, which is a companion star of our sun. But in any case, it comes near to our solar system, and the dates that Zecharia Sitchin gives is once every 3,600 years. Its orbit is a very long one, and it goes far, far out into space and then comes near the solar system. And according to Sitchin, the reason for this flowering of civilization, about 4,000, let me get my dates exact here. According to Sitchin, the beginning of I said about 4,000 BC. He gives the date of 3,800 BC. Other scholars give sometimes earlier dates, but that is the date that Zecharia Sitchin gives. And he says that that happened, the civilization suddenly flowered, suddenly appeared out of nowhere, because that was the time when this planet of Nibiru came near our solar system, and the Anunnaki came at that time with what would you call a reinforcement, and they brought new developments of civilization which they felt were appropriate for the human beings who they had created hundreds of thousands of years earlier, and that's why the Sumerian civilization suddenly flowered. And Sitchin makes two other dates which are very interesting in terms of the development of civilization, and that was 3,600 years earlier, that is about 7,400 BC, was a time when humanity also made a great leap forward in terms of civilization, from being hunters and food gatherers to being farmers and producers of pottery. So that was another sudden development of human civilization that happened quite astonishingly in a very short period of time, again in the same area of the Middle East or West Asia, where the Sumerian civilization later developed. So the beginning of farming, the beginning of starting with growing wheat and barley, and then other grains like millet and rye, and then different fruits and vegetables, these all, according to Sitchin, were also given to humanity by the Anunnaki, by the Niburians. So, and then the other time period, which would be 3,600 years before that, was 11,000 BC. And we're going to go into detail about that, because that was the time of the flood. And the story of Noah in the Bible and the Sumerian story of the flood have many correspondences. Of course, the date, as biblical scholars, traditional biblical scholars had it was much later than 11,000 BC, but from the Sumerian texts we have detailed information about dates. That is, the king lists in the Bible, or the patriarch lists, and a number of years that they lived, that was the basis of the biblical chronology by traditional scholars. But it's quite clear from the Sumerian texts that the king lists are there, given in great detail how many kings ruled, from how long, and how long they lived. So the dates of these different things can be determined very precisely from the Sumerian king lists. So that date of 11,000 BC was coming from the Sumerian texts and the lists of the kings, which all give precise dates in which everything happened. So extraterrestrial spirituality is the topic of this course, and what we're beginning with is the Sumerian civilization and the Anunnaki people from the planet of Nibiru, who had a different concept of spirituality and religion than we do today, and we're going to go into it more detail in future classes. But what I just wanted to establish today very clearly was just using modern science, archaeology and anthropology, we can show that something very, very special happened about 4000 BC, and a huge civilization, highly advanced civilization, suddenly developed in southern Iraq, and the Sumerian civilization, or Sumerian. It was named Shumer, evidently the name they had for themselves, but when the European scholars originally discovered it and discovered those texts, they had mispronounced, you can say, the sh as sa, so therefore the name was Sumeria, as we use it. And in the Bible, the name is Shinar. The same sh sound is there, and a little bit different. There's a n instead of a m, but it's the same very, very ancient civilization, according to the biblical accounts also. All right. Let me look at some comments here. I did read all the comments from last time, from the last class, and there was only one question that I felt was really important to deal with, and that was the question about how did the Anunnaki, or the people from Nibiru, discover the Earth, and how did they get here? So they have spaceships, they have flying saucers, and that was their means of transport. And evidently they just were exploring in looking for gold, and they discovered that there was gold available. Perhaps they had some sort of, like we have satellite remote sensing, they may have had remote sensing devices by which they could see that there was some gold present on the Earth. So they were just traveling around to different places looking for gold, and that's how they discovered Earth. And okay, so let's see if we have any important questions today. Let's see. Okay, so today I'm able to see the comments, which yesterday, in the last class, somehow I wasn't able to. All right, people are just saying hello and assalamu alaikum, and I appreciate this. Where are you, brother? I am in Esparto, California. That's Northern California in the Central Valley. There are comments you tell about Burma. I'm not going to do those things. I'm giving a class now about extraterrestrial spirituality, and I'm not going to deviate to other topics. Okay, there's a question here in Urdu. So, sir, agar आप इस्लाम और मुसलमानों से इतने मुतासिर हैं तो मुसलमान क्यों नहीं हो जाते? मैं मुसलमान हूँ. मैं हर मज़हब को मानता हूँ और मैं इस्लाम को भी मानता हूँ. Okay, let's see, Deb McKenzie says, I hope I can replay this so I can take notes. I am a two-person learner when it comes to sound. Thank you. So happy I was online. I'm notified now. Yes, this will be posted, and you will be able to replay it after it's finished. It'll maybe take a few minutes before it's available, but it will be available shortly after the class ends. And certainly take notes. This class, in case you haven't heard it yet, it's every Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. California time. So if you're not in the Pacific time zone, you can calculate what time it happens. And Deborah Minatel Bateman asks, does the book make known that herbs were used for medical purposes? Botany, yes. There is description of herbs used for medical purposes, medicinal purposes. They also describe surgery. In fact, eye cataract surgery is described. It appears from archaeological evidence that they also had brain surgery even. That is, they found corpses, or they found skeletons, which revealed that they had been surgically operated on under their skull. So they even, there's a wide variety of medical systems that are described, and they also used mantras or zikr, or they also had a spiritual or a sound-based system of medical treatment also, which was very interesting. All right, we have other irrelevant questions, which I'm not going to read now. All right, so according to Quran, Prophet Muhammad, this is Arslan Khizr's comment, according to Quran, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is mercy to all worlds, so it means he, along with other prophets, have visited the other worlds, spreading the message of Allah, that is oneness of God, unity, and love. Yes, the Quran very clearly describes the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, traveling to other worlds, traveling to various heavens. And the Bible also describes different personalities who have traveled to different heavens. So, yes, that's a good point, that prophets and other personalities also can visit other planets and other worlds and other heavens and other dimensions. Okay, Luqman Jamil says, what is the nature of relation between humans and extraterrestrials nowadays? That's a very good question. It's not exactly what we're talking about today, but since the course is about extraterrestrial spirituality, I can mention that the relation between human beings and extraterrestrials nowadays is actually the same that it's been always for thousands and millions of years, really, that we are brothers and sisters. Extraterrestrials are our relatives. They may be even genetically related to us. Many of them are. But even if they're not, they are related to us spiritually as brothers and sisters. So, and nowadays that relationship is increasing because in the 20th century, I think a number of extraterrestrial groups, for various reasons, decided that the time had come that they should visit Earth more and become more public in their visitation. And as I've mentioned on many occasions, and the reason why I'm teaching this course and why I taught the course last year also on extraterrestrial history and cosmology and space travel and secret space programs, the reason I'm interested in this is that I myself have met extraterrestrials from the time I was 9 years old, and many people, many millions of people, definitely, according to polls, it definitely is many millions of people, human beings, have met extraterrestrials. And many great personalities, including politicians like former President Jimmy Carter of the United States, have also interacted with extraterrestrials or seen UFOs at least. And a number of astronauts, such as Gordon Cooper, the first American astronaut, and Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon, have also, or had also, spoken openly. They both passed away now, But they had also spoken openly about the reality of UFOs and extraterrestrials. So many people have met extraterrestrials, and the relationship is, well, I should explain a little bit more. There are good extraterrestrials and there are bad extraterrestrials, just like there are good human beings and bad human beings. There are, as far as I know, most of them are either good or sort of neutral. That is, they're visiting in order to help us, or they're visiting in order to observe us. And there are a few groups of extraterrestrials who are negative. That is, they are visiting this planet in order to try to control us, in order to use us for their purposes. So the relationship, I've written an article about this. You can visit my website, allintelligentlife.com, in which basically I make this point, that all these different types of extraterrestrials are relatives. There are relations. They may be genetically related to us or not, but they are probably, if they're not yet, they will be hybridizable. That's very interesting. That's going on, that there are hybridization programs between different groups of human beings and extraterrestrials. And many extraterrestrials are human beings. That is, they look exactly like us, and we may be descended from them, or they may be related to us as cousins, or in some cases, because time travel technology is already available in secret programs in the United States, CIA programs and DIA programs. They have already developed time travel. But ourselves from the future could also be some of the people who we consider extraterrestrials, because they come and appear either in spaceships or by other means. So that's the relationship between humans and extraterrestrials. Some of them may be us, some of them are our relatives genetically, our cousins, and others may be different species, but they are similar enough to us. They almost all have 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose, maybe not a nose, some of them don't have noses, but they have a mouth, and most of them have 2 arms and 2 legs. Not all of them, but most of them are very similar to us, even if they're not humans looking exactly like us. Some of them, as is well known, some of them look more like reptiles, that is more like snakes or serpents or dinosaurs. And some of them are, well, the well-known ones are the greys, who have very large black eyes, but otherwise have a basically human shape. And some of them are very short, only 2 or 3 feet tall, or some of them are even 1 foot tall or less, and some of them are much taller than us. Some of the ones that look like human beings are twice as tall as we are, even 3 times as tall or more than we are. And so there are many different types of extraterrestrials, but all of them are our relations. All of them are a part of the same universal family of intelligent life. That's why I've called my institute the Institute of All Intelligent Life. All right, that was a pretty long answer to that question. Let's just see if there are any other significant questions. There is one question about when you recognize your soul, time and space no longer mean for that spiritual person, and one can travel across worlds. He, she, is hidden angels, jinns, and humans on other planets. So this is a comment by Arslan Khizr, who says that Khwaja Shamsuddin Azimi is a great Sufi who also says that you can travel to other planets and visit other types of intelligent life forms. All right. Let's see. Luqman Jamil asks, as you mentioned the quotes from Bible, does Islam also discuss about intelligent life? And if yes, will you discuss it? Yes, Islam does discuss about intelligent life. In fact, I just read a comment by somebody who says this great Sufi living today in Karachi does also talk about extraterrestrial life. That's certainly, and I have not studied it myself in great depth about the Quran and its mention of extraterrestrial life, but there are numerous quotes. In fact, a Pakistani friend of mine once posted on my Facebook page a list of, I think I can't remember exactly how many, 20 or 25 verses from the Quran which talk about extraterrestrial existence in sometimes pretty clear and sometimes less clear terms. But yes, so in answer to your question, Islam does discuss about intelligent life outside of the earth. After all, angels are described. Angels are certainly extraterrestrials. They don't live on this planet, and they are intelligent life. So certainly angels are discussed in Islam, and also jinn and other beings. All right. Okay, so it's very interesting in response to that earlier question. Arsalan Khizar is just saying, if we ponder upon Quranic verses, then we get this point that everything is living, nothing is dead, and everything is intellectual, because Allah says, everything in skies and earth do my zikr, including earth, air, plants, animals, birds, iron, atoms, cells, everything. What do you say about this? This is my last question. Love you. Lots of prayers for you, sir. Yes, I would agree with that. Certainly there is life everywhere, and everywhere throughout the universe, and even on this planet there is life in even atoms and cells. That's my understanding. Cells certainly are living, and even atoms, and even mountains. There are all sorts of conscious forms that we might usually not even think of as living, but do have consciousness. So that was a very good comment. Thank you. People are asking me things. Salman Pirzada, I'm going to see, can you sing any Pakistani song? This is not the place for such questions, and I'm not going to deal with them. I shouldn't have even read that, because I said I wouldn't. But please understand, I am not giving a class on whatever you want to talk about. I'm giving a class on extraterrestrial spirituality, and I'm only going to deal with questions on that topic. Arslan Kazur says again, my Murshid says that there are humans on some planets whose body is transparent, and plants there also have transparent body. Yes, there are all sorts of different types of living beings. Deb McKenzie, do you think the Book of Enoch coincides with the Sumerian teachings? Yes, there definitely is a lot in the Book of Enoch that does correspond even more closely with the Sumerian teachings than the Bible does. And finally, Luqman Jamil asks, can we see or meet extraterrestrials? Yes, we can. I have. Many people have. But we can't force them to come before us and meet us. There is a very interesting organization led by Dr. Stephen Greer, and he actually has a program for meeting extraterrestrials. So if you really want to do that, you can look up Stephen Greer and his website, and they have a program which is specifically meant for attracting extraterrestrial craft, and they have many times succeeded in interacting with extraterrestrials intentionally. So I've never done that. I've never met extraterrestrials as a result of my own endeavor. They have come to me sometimes without my requesting it or expecting it, but there is that program for intentionally attracting them and interacting with them. Okay. All right. Thank you all very, very much. I'm going to end the class now, and I do look forward to continuing this course. And I want to remind everybody, although I've said that I will only guarantee to answer questions if they're about the topic, and if you pay some tuition fees. Nevertheless, I've been answering all the good questions. But I do request you to go on my website, allintelligentlife.com, because I'm not a rich man, and I need money, And one of the reasons I'm doing this course is to hopefully get some people who appreciate it, and will give some donations. So you can give a donation, or you can pay some tuition for this course on the website allintelligentlife.com. And there's also a full record of all the classes that I gave last year on extraterrestrials, and also other courses that the Institute has taught. So please go to that website. You can find out more about me and about my extraterrestrial experiences. You can find out more about my ideas about the relationship of human beings with other forms of life. And there's also an article post about timelines, and it's very, very important in terms of extraterrestrial information. So please go to allintelligentlife.com, and you can see other posts of this course and of the previous course that I taught last year. Okay, thank you all very much. Peace be with you.